And so let me give you a rough outline of how we're going to do things today. I'm going to introduce our guests, and I'm going to read a couple of selections from the book. Ordinarily, we have the authors read, but they deferred to me today to read.
Thank you.
So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to throw a question out to them. And then we're going to have a free-for-all conversation. And then at the end, we'll do a little cleanup stuff, like talking about where you can get the book if you want to get it. Can I just see by a show of hands who's read the book? So like maybe 3 people. All right. And the rest of us haven't. So we'll sort of assume no knowledge of the book. So
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about these folks. As we learned earlier from Wendy, she is one of the original authors of Our Bodies, Ourselves, that famous manual that taught all us women how to understand our bodies and what purposes they could be used for. And that's one of her main claims to fame, but she's much beloved for other reasons as well. Wendy is part of the Quaker community. She's a member at Cambridge meeting and a vital part of Friends for Lesbian, Gay, Transgender, and Queer Concerns. And we're really happy to have her with us today. And we're also glad to have with us Mary Norman, Wendy's longtime friend. And Mary is, I want to say the word important. That's not really what I mean, but let me just say she's an important person in her own right. You can read about her work online. She's someone who did corrections work from 1968 to 1993. She was part of the correction system, rose up in the ranks to a high level in the correction system, had to fight to gain respect, and she did that well, but also had to fight against one of the more recent bosses she had toward the end of her career, because Mary was very interested in rehabilitation of prisoners, and her boss was not interested in rehabilitation of prisoners. Mary was also very interested in equal justice. In other words, working towards people of different races getting the same kind of sentence for the same kind of crime, rather than what was and has been and still is very typical, which is that often people who are persons of color, African Americans, get longer sentences than white people for similar crimes. So Mary's been very active in the movement for equal justice, has gotten recognized by Brian Stevenson for her work, which I think is fabulous. And we're really happy to have her with us as well. So I'm going to start by reading some passages from the book. And then I'm going to throw a question out to Wendy and Mary. And I'm going to tell them what the question is right now, so they can have the chance to know what they're going to be talking about.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to read some selections, and then I'm going to say to each of you, so tell us how you got from there to develop this rich friendship that you have today.
Thanks. And I just want to say, Mona, we're having a thunderstorm here right now in Boston area. So if I disappear, I will hope to come back.
Thanks for the warning. We hope you don't disappear.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Wendy talking. Wendy is the voice in the book. Americans don't like to address social class. Policymakers and the media have long assumed or pretended that our country is free of class distinctions. In 2011, activists in the Occupy Wall Street movement would point out that the wealthy 1% of Americans live large on the sacrifices of the other 99%. In my childhood as a WASP, being upper or upper middle class was about money, yes, but also about taste, culture, refinement, education in the classics, high art. We didn't think specifically about class. We just thought ourselves superior. I'm going ahead a little bit to another selection now. And in this part of the book, Wendy has just come home to her house where she and her family stay in Nantucket during the summers. Mary is there as a helper to the family. Mary, I don't know if you thought of yourself as a maid or mother's helper. Did you have a title or some way of understanding what you were in that family at that time?
I was the maid.
You were the maid. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Mary, who is a young person at this time, is in the house. She's the maid. Wendy's just coming home. So here's Wendy talking. Coming home from town at midday the next day, passing outside the open windows of the dining room and kitchen, I heard my mother and Mary talking. My mother was speaking in her conversation voice, not the voice she used when reviewing Mary's tasks. Through the window, I could see Mom in her usual spot at the dining room table, leaning back comfortably against the wall shared by the kitchen. My mother used that seat so she could tap on the wall at dinner, telling Mary when it was time to clear the table or to bring more food. Usually shut because my mother liked it that way, the door between the dining room and kitchen was now wide open. Passing by the kitchen window on my way to the door, I could hear Mary saying something back to my mother. Not yes, ma'am, or will you have more iced tea, but one relaxed, casual sentence, and then another. Mary sat with her own lunch at the kitchen table. Back to back, dining room to kitchen, my mother and Mary were having lunch and talking. With a testy and critical husband and a self-involved daughter, my mother seemed to be benefiting from Mary's listening and kind attention. The unwritten rules of domestic service and toxic dividers of race and class put the kindest person in the house on the other side of a wall. Mary jumped to her feet when I entered through the kitchen door. Please finish your lunch, I said, but Mary remained standing. As I joined my mother in the dining room, Mary swung the kitchen door slowly shut behind me. The brief moment of informal exchange between my mother and Mary, their lunch together on opposite sides of the kitchen wall, had ended. Okay, we're gonna move along some more years. These two folks are now more into their adulthood, and let me find where we are in the book. Okay, so Wendy comes home, she's exhausted. She sees Mary. Wendy says, can we talk? The story goes on. We turned towards the back door and tiptoed out so quietly that my mother, drinking and reading alone in the living room, did not hear us. We made our way along the unlit wooden walkway towards the dark beach and the sound of the surf. What I remember as a smoothly tacit agreement to head out to the beach together, an easy flow of two women eager to talk, must have been a necessarily calculated choice for Mary. In my dream state of whiteness and wealth, I did not have to think about my race or social standing as we escaped to the beach. This was my world. I knew that I would be safe. For Mary, the stakes in a beach walk were infinitely higher. Despite my mother's early fantasy that Mary might enjoy a swim, Mary's presence was tolerated on that beach only in service, to relay a phone message, to refresh my mother's iced tea. Mary's unwritten contract of domestic service did not include pleasant strolls on the beach. Pent up in that small room with the folded laundry and the ironing board, a beautiful beach just a stone's throw away, Mary had no safe way to enjoy the breeze and the beauty without a white person, without, in this case, me. In real and definite ways, this open beach and gorgeous ocean were closed to her. So I'm going to stop reading now and ask the two of you, so how did you get from this place where Mary is the maid for the family of Wendy, a very affluent white family, and Wendy is becoming aware of how much privilege she has and becoming aware of how little privilege Mary has in that context, especially. How did you get from that place to the place that you are now, where you have a very rich friendship with each other? How'd that happen?
Good question. Mary, do you want to start or do you want me to? What's your pref?
I think I'll start for just a short part and you can continue.
Okay.
It was because Wendy was so inquisitive about everything. When I was 15 and arrived there in Nantucket, I don't know, I think I must have been the first Black person that she had ever really been around. And so she just wanted to know everything. She wanted to know what I had in my suitcase. What do you do with your hair? And so I would talk to her. And so this always continued up until, I'm trying to remember how many years it went on, sort of like that. Of course, then she was reading books and then we exchanged books and I always read her mother's books. So the not being able to be on the beach or whatever really didn't bother me, because in my off time or whatever, I spent reading. I was an avid reader at that particular time. So now I'll let Wendy tell you how she felt about it.
Okay. I remember you're saying that your grandmother who you grew up with was so strict that you never got to read the kind of books my mother read. And so it was a huge thing as a 15-year-old going on 16 to read these big, thick hardback novels with princesses and princes and probably some sex, I would imagine.
It was.
And I was 12 at the time, so, and a very inquisitive 12. And it did start a pattern, I think. What took us from those early times. Actually, I think by reading about our first walk, you took us to the threshold of a different kind of relationship. And when we took that first walk, Mary was already in the work that you described so well from that wonderful page on my website. And I was involved with Our Bodies Ourselves, and I was a feminist, and also I've asked Mary, remember when I asked you why you thought we became friends? And she said, well, there was no one else out there. It's like we were both really lonely. Mary for, so many reasons, including there were so few African-American people in her daily life. Well, really none.
There was none.
None, except for when you made a date for your day off, which sometimes my mother wouldn't let you take anyway, just because there'd be some drama, some family drama. And I was lonely because I was understanding that I was lesbian, and certainly didn't want to talk to my family about that. And they were drinking heavily, and that's really lonely for a kid. So we were both, when we took that walk, it was really turning a corner for us, and we started talking about our lives in a different way. And then as a feminist health activist in a white collective of women, we were starting to get really excellent, important feedback, like from the people in the National Black Women's Health Project and other from the Combahee River Collective in Boston, that white women really, it just was a travesty when we tried to talk for all women. There was so much we didn't know. And so I was becoming aware of how little I knew, and starting to read. I really made a commitment to read all works by mostly women, African-American women, and I really did it for the next 30 years. And so I was beginning to glimpse how some of the ways Mary grew up, because in domestic service, I remember your role, Mary, was to know a whole lot about me, and my role was to not really think your life was important. And because I was so inquisitive, that started to change very early on in a way that probably bugged you, but because Mary couldn't say no, because I'm standing at her doorway asking questions. But anyway, so I was just, it was the times, it was feminism, it was beginning to look at white privilege and racism that opened me in a different way to a different kind of friendship. And then one of the patterns of our friendship that you'll see in the book is that I'm pretty clueless, and I just time after time don't understand what Mary's experience she's coming from. And so one of our patterns was Mary's patience, I would say, with things like remember when I thought you were workaholic?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Because Mary worked 3 jobs always, and she owned a house, which was huge, and had 2 children, and was a single parent, and was just working all the time to make that work. And I think you work too hard. I think maybe you're a workaholic. Why don't you not do that job? And you were so patient with me. I didn't have a clue about, everyone I know now who grew up working class says, of course she was working 3 jobs. But I just didn't have a clue. And then my mother at one point said, what was that thing you told me? Oh, when she paid you one day and you said, oh, this is really good, it's payday, because I had no money left. And what did my mother said? You had no money?
Yeah, she said, I just can't imagine not having any money. I said, well, it happens with me quite quite a lot. I said, by the time I pay all my bills and all, I said, I have no money left until the next payday.
Yeah.
Um,
So one of the moments, other moments of change in our friendship was when I read a book for seminary. I did a project and I read a memoir by a woman named Anne Moody called Coming of Age in Mississippi. Really important book. And so I read it. I was when I had an assignment, I'd choose something that that it would teach me on many levels. And so I read that book, wrote a psychobiography or something of Anne Moody. And then that summer, when Mary and I saw each other, I gave her the book and said, this book has really meant a lot to me. Would you read it? And she read it in one night. And the next day said, that book was my life. And all of a sudden, through reading Anne Moody and taking in the details of her family and sharecropping and how she was in charge of her 4-year-old. At 4, she was in charge of her 2-year-old sister because the parents were working. I mean, just everything I hadn't known, I'd never known anything about. I'd been exposed to in that book. And when Mary said that book was my life, there was another key moment for us of turning a corner, because I began to understand what I didn't know, which is really important for white people, I think, to begin to understand what we don't know. And that was my moment. But then I started to get really self-conscious. So then came another great moment in our friendship, which, remember, I stood at the door trying to ask you some question about being Black. And back then, kind of good white people didn't talk, like we were trying to be colorblind, supposedly, which is a total insult and makes people invisible. But I was really nervous about saying the word Black to Mary. Hold on one second. Let's just.
oh, excuse me.
Yeah. Hi, Kenny.
How you doing?
Good.
Oh, you could hear.
We could.
Sorry.
Yeah. So where was I before I said hi to Kenny? We were turning another corner.
Yeah, you were afraid to say the word Black.
I was standing in your doorway in Nantucket, and I was afraid to say the word Black.
Yeah.
And you said to me, do you remember the words you said?
Yeah, Wendy, how can I talk to you if you can't be honest? I said, it's fine.
Right. And you said, if you walk on eggshells, I won't be able to talk to you the way I do.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that was huge. That was a huge turning point, because I knew I had to get over myself and be real and not tiptoe around the fact that we were from different racial backgrounds and all of that. And that it wasn't, in fact, bad to talk about race. What was really bad was to ignore it and to pretend it wasn't a factor in your life and in my life. So that was a really important turning point also. And there were others, but this is a long answer to your question. And Mary, did you want to add any more to Mona's question about how we started one place and ended another?
No, that was pretty much it right there, Wendy. And of course, it just continued on with our walks on the beach on the summers that I was in Nantucket. I remember the years that I was very involved in the corrections. But then I would take my vacation time and save my vacation time. And then I would use my vacation time to go to Nantucket, which would be, at that particular time, I only had 2 weeks. So I could only go for 2 weeks. I couldn't go the full month. But
and my mother,
that's how we
my mother wouldn't take no for an answer when she just really wanted you there, and she paid you, but she you left your kids for that 2 weeks. It was a sacrifice.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So we also visited in each other's houses and had a lot of conversation. And then the last turning point I'll mention actually is when we're walking on the beach one night, and Mary said,
Yeah.
we should write a book together because no one would believe our friendship.
From my background and your background, it's like very, very, very unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you said it'll make us a lot of money, which, that's not so true, but oh well. And then you said, and it'll get us on Oprah. And that's how we timed that moment, because that was the first year of Oprah's show. So it was a long time ago.
Yes, it was.
And so then we can talk, if you want, about the creation of the book, which happened over the next 30, 35 years and went through many changes. But
Well, let me stop at this point and ask the other folks who are with us today. Has what you heard or read resonated with you in any way? Does it remind you of any of your own experiences? Are there questions or comments that you'd like to make? Yes, Jill.
Mary, did you work with Wendy's family anytime other than summer?
Yes, I did. I actually, I would say I worked for them for 42 years. In fact, when I retired in 93, Wendy's father had moved to Florida. So Mary, I want you to come. So we sort of went back and forth. And so I ended up going. I moved to Florida and I took care of him right up to the day he passed. And then I think a year after that, I moved back to New Jersey because my sons were in New Jersey still. So it's been a lifetime, might as well say, with the family.
Wow. And this was year round then?
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, for a while it was once a week. You would come once or twice a week in the evening after your work. And then when my mother was so sick, you came every night after work.
Yeah, I did. I got my shift changed so that I was working 7 to 3, and then I would drive from Titusville to Princeton and make dinner, do her bath, and she would wait for me. She just wanted me to come, and I just at that particular time I was very close to her, so I was there.
You were.
Mary, I have another question based on that then. Wendy, you've talked about your passage of change, and I'm wondering, for Mary, you're saying that you were close to her mother. What was your parents' passage of change, and did they?
My parents?
No, I'm sorry, Wendy's parents, because what we're hearing how Wendy changed, and I'm wondering if her parents had an awakening.
Oh,
Interesting question. I keep on saying go read the book because there's a lot, because it was a very strong relationship between my mother and Mary, and I think I was jealous of it at times because they were so close, and I wanted to be kind of a better friend somehow. Jealousy and competitiveness. Also, my mother. There's this saying that some white employers say, "Oh, she's just like one of the family," And that's true and not true. And there's a whole chapter in the book where Mary and I go back and forth about that towards the end of the book. But my mother really loved Mary. They really loved each other. And as Toni Morrison says in The Bluest Eye, love is never any better than the lover. So my mother's love was limited by her own racism, by what she didn't know. Didn't she say to you, Mary, that if she really thought you should be having lunch on the same side of the wall, but it wasn't done?
Yes, that she just, she couldn't because it was just something that was never done. And of course, she came from, her background was the Riker family of New York, right, Wen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so very prestigious.
Yeah. Yep. So she was up top person. Well, you kept saying to me they were people of their own time, and they were. So there were limits, and yet my mother also knew that you were a person who would live up to what you said. So she got you to promise some things like that you'd take care of my father after she died, and you lived up to that promise.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Mary, I'd like to know what Wendy's mother's change in her relationship to you, what that was like for you.
What that was like for me. Actually, even going all the way back when, say, I was 16, 17, because I came all those years. The friendship was sort of growing then, but it was still the same. She could come out into the kitchen and she'd talk to me after a really nice dinner or whatever. Like I told, when she'd come out, she'd slip $20 or $40 in my apron pocket. These things continued at Christmas time, as we got older even. Wendy and I, we got the exact same thing for Christmas. I think that's when you were saying you were jealous a little bit, Len. But still, even though all the really nice things that she did and how kindly she was to me, it was that invisible door, we'll say, was there. And so I just dealt with it. And it was, even when I was telling Wendy, when I started in the corrections, and when I was 10 years with the women, and then 15 years in the male institution. I was the first female to go into an all-male institution. And the officers, I'll never will forget him. That first day I was there, his name was Machowski. He said, he was the lieutenant and I was the sergeant. He said, "Why are you here?" He said, "You should be home with your children making dinner." And so I said, "Well, I need the job." And so I said, "What would you like for me to do?" He said, "Just go over there and sit down. Don't say anything, don't do anything." I was like, "Well, all right." So that was my first day in male institution when I first started.
You said that you cried as you drove home, you cried day after day.
I did. I would say I'm not going back. That's it. Because they were just so rude to me. They drew up petitions to get me out. But I did. Every day I cried going home, and then I would say, I'm not going back. I'm going to quit. And then my friends would say, no, don't run. Don't let them run you out. And because at that, even there in that particular, there was only, I would be the third Black person there. Everyone else was Caucasian. So, but then the population was, might as well say, 99% Black. So I stuck it out, and I opened a door, and it was like opening a door, because there were several women came after me and came in as officers. And after I retired in '93, there was one female that her name was Mamie Sapp. I had trained her. She ended up being the assistant warden there. So I think now, it took me years to realize that you really did something good.
Yep.
Yeah,
And oh, sorry. You had told me about the when they were testing you by taking you to a bar and having a drinking contest.
Yes, that was when I was going to take over. Actually, I'd been promoted to lieutenant, and I was given the third shift, 3 to 11, the second shift. And so the officers was like, well, we have to, this was in New Hope, there was a bar, says, we're going to have a drink, and so if you can't hold your drink, we can't follow you. So we all went, so they had called ahead of time, and we got off work that night, and we stopped in a bar, and the drink was what they call kamikaze. And they had, it was shot glasses, and a dozen of them was lined up across the bar. The bartender had already made them and had them ready. And so it was like going down the line, drinking. It was really stupid. I don't even know how I even made it home. But since I was able to do it, it sort of broke the ice. I had no more problems with that group of guys. They accepted me. And so things got a whole lot better.
thank you for sharing that. So one of the things I'm wondering about is if anyone would like to talk about their experiences creating friendships or relationships with people of a different race, and how it went, and what obstacles you encountered, and how you got through the obstacles, if you did.
Well, unless somebody else goes, I'm going to keep talking, so I apologize in advance. Is there someone else who's?
I just want to say, Mona, that what I think is different in Mary and Wendy, you can correct me, but it seems that their relationship, but also class, and so that adds a whole other dimension, particularly when Mary was not living in your house. She was coming and going and working for you. So that makes it all the more difficult and amazing that you two are able to find the humanity in each one of you and not be deterred by all these obstacles of, class and race and more than a racial difference.
Lee, and then I have some, I want to answer your question too, but Lee first.
Just bouncing off of Roz, because I grew up very, very rural on a farm in upstate New York, and very white. And I made a comment. I've been a member of Central Philly for maybe 15 years, but I made a comment in a business meeting about, we were gathered to talk about combating racism. And I made a comment about having grown up poor and about how classism is so similar in our culture to racism in dividing us. And afterwards, some person of color, I don't remember who it was, took me aside and said, we were talking about combating racism and you were trying to divert the attention. And I had a hard time with that because it felt to me like I was appropriately combining. But I understand that particularly in that group of people at that time, racism and combating racism was huge. And we were all people of privilege, mostly. So classism didn't seem to fit. And I'm just wanting to thank you, Roz, for noticing that about this book. I want to read the book. But if anybody wants to comment about that, I'm also interested. And thank you, Wendy.
Well, just the other day, I was talking with someone about, the whole concept of intersectionality has become a really useful tool that some of us didn't have for a while. And Kimberly Crenshaw introduced it, but it's like we are understanding that all these things interweave so much. And I was laughing and I was saying, I think my book, it's not an academic book, but it is totally intersectional. And the person laughed. But I just wanted to say, and you'll find this in the book actually, that I felt like to be almost worthy of an interracial friendship, of friendship with Mary, I just had so much I had to learn. And some of it was about class, like that I thought she was workaholic because she worked 3 jobs. I learned a lot from Ta-Nehisi Coates about equity. There's a whole chapter about house equity. When Mary made that sudden move to help my father, there was a whole thing about the house that she bought, and he took her mortgage but wouldn't tell her that he was going to forgive it. And there's a whole chapter on that. There were so many things that I needed to expose myself to and not be leaning on Mary to teach me. So that's why I just read and read and read. And then often we'd share the books and sometimes we wouldn't. But I wanted to take the opportunity of your question, Mona, to say, I feel like if you're in a cross-race or cross-class friendship, and you're the person who's in the privileged position in the society that you live in, there's a lot of responsibility to just learn so you can be a more dependable friend and be more accurate in your understanding of the person that you supposedly love. And that's the other thing I wanted to say is, what brought me and Mary through. There's a lot of love there and forgiveness. I know that was your question to other people, but I just had to say those 2 things. Mary, did you want to add anything to?
No.
Joan, you had your hand up. Do you still want to jump into the conversation?
I'm a little hesitant, but I think I'll do it anyway. I came from a working class background, and when I was back in Cambridge meeting with Wendy, I first met George Lakey, who gave a weekend seminar on class. And at one point in that seminar, he had the people with working class backgrounds come up to the front and tell the other people how we felt about things. And I felt like I finally got to sit at the people of color table, you know. I got to be someone who could speak my truth. I'm also trying, as Wendy is reading, right now I'm almost finished reading the 1619 Project, and I'm getting a lot out of it. And there's a lot that I didn't understand that I'm beginning to, even though I've read a bunch of other books, this one is just putting a lot of things together. And I'm glad, because I still do have that hesitancy that Wendy talked about earlier. When talking to my friends of color, who I think I'm not as close as you and Mary are, but I have friends. How much can I say? How frank can I be? How intrusive should I be or not be? And that's hard.
Thank you, Joan. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
So Becky, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. You had asked one of your earlier questions, Mona, was were there parts that resonated with us? And the thing about reading the books by women of color, by Black women, was it sort of strikes me because I needed to do that too. And probably for different reasons, but at some point in my life, I realized that I had gotten all the way through school and college and had never been required to read a book by a Black person.
Uh-huh.
And that just seemed so wrong, let alone a Black woman, you know, that I just started reading nothing but books by Black women for years.
Yep.
And just felt like, how long is it going to take for me to make up for all those years of being fed other information that that I really felt that I needed to do that as a person as well as a writer.
Thank you, Becky. Other comments, questions?
I just want to say that I know I'll have more to say after I read the book. Somehow I missed the fact that this book came out, and I have had lots of cross-race relationships and friendships, and so I'm really curious to read it and to see, you know, what kinds of things my relationships might have in common to yours.
So let me just say quickly that a friend gave me 75 books to use, bought 75 books and handed them to me to use for book groups or people who might want to use the book in their work or in their teaching or whatever. So if any of you are in a book group that wants to read the book, I could send you a couple of books if they, you know, if it's a group of people who maybe it's $16.95. You know, it's a chunk. It's a paperback, but it's still a chunk. So anyway, if any of you are in a book group and you think you want to read it, just contact me, and I will draw on this wonderful gift from my friend to share a couple of books. We did that. We sent some books to Iowa. Mary and I are going to be speaking to a book group in Iowa in May, so we sent them some books. Anyway.
Thank you for that offer. I see Jeff has his hand up. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm a writer and I write a lot of books about myself a lot. I was scared to read your book because my prejudice is, well, another white person writing about racism. And what I want to know is, does Mary speak during your book? Do you quote her? Do you interview her some of the time? Because I assume that.
Yes, yes, she does. And
Yeah, so you talk some
we,
all the time.
yes, we text, I text a lot to her.
Uh,
Yeah. Wendy, she keeps journals. I think she's always kept a journal. And she had which my memory is like, I can remember incidents, but as to be able to say, oh, well, it was in January 19, whatever. I can't remember that, but she had all of that information.
mhm.
And so anytime that she was writing, and if she didn't quite remember, she would text me and I could answer her. I would text her back. And that's how we communicated back and forth that way if we weren't together.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the book took 30 years because it needed more and more of Mary's voice in it. And as things changed and I learned more, I understood how impossible it was for me to write our book. So that's why it's presented as my book co-created with Mary,
Okay.
which is more accurate. And another thing was, it was really important. Some white people who write books like this, well, I'm thinking of The Help. She made the white person kind of the hero of a very important moment in the civil rights movement that was led by Black people. So I knew I needed to make myself not the hero. And I took copious notes whenever Mary and I talked. And I have to say, it's a relief now in our friendship that the book's done and I don't have to take notes on our conversations. I can just be present. But once Mary said we should write a book together, I started taking notes on everything she said. And finally, texting came in. And that's why it's good it took so long. Because once we were able to text each other, Mary said, ask me whatever you want. And so I just would ask her, she'd text back. And finally I had her voice that wasn't coming through my ears. It was still in response to my question, but it was more direct. And there's as much of that in the book as we could get in. Thank you for asking that question. And the book is a lot about what I didn't, about my own microaggressions and mess ups and what I needed to learn to be a dependable friend. So it is another book by a white person about race, and I tried hard to not fit into some of the tropes.
Thank you. So we're up against the end of the hour. I want to thank everyone for being here, especially our two guests, Wendy and Mary. It's been a very rich discussion. And one of the things that I'm just holding on to from the very beginning of the hour, when I asked how the two of you got to be closer, one of the things I heard from each of you was that reading really helped. You said that. And reading was really a bridge for both of you in learning more about what was important to each other and what was on your minds, and also sort of moving towards being honest with each other. So I'm hitting on that because I'm here in my role as clerk of our library committee here at Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting. And as was mentioned before, we do have this book in our library. We've only got one copy at Central Philly. Wendy, thank you very much for the offer that you're willing to give out some books. But also, Wendy, can you tell us if people want to buy the book, where can they buy it if they don't want to use Amazon?
Yes. So if you go to my website, which I hope you'll do, because it's got such a great page about Mary's work that Mona, you were drawing on.
Right.
So the address is Wendy Sanford -thesewallsbetweenus.com. And that it does list Amazon, but first it lists something called Bookshop, which used to have a different name, but it's a place that is a kind of a nonprofit bookstore, and a sharing of profit bookstore. And then Porter Square Books, which is, you can get a signed copy if you want. So that's my local bookstore. But it's for sale at bookstores, and it's so great to ask a library to get it, because then other people can see it also. Yeah.
Wait, Wendy, what's the rest of the address? Is it
Just
at,
put the website.
I think Joan just put it in, bless you.
Mona put it
Mona
in.
did, Mona did.
twinitses@.com? Okay, thank you.
And Oprah has not discovered us, but we're okay with it. Well, we're okay with it, right, Mary?
Yes, I think she's going to though.
We'll see if we're still here.
Yes.
So the other thing about our being so old, Mary's 81 and I'm 77, is that the book could have gotten better and better, but we had to either do it or it wouldn't get done. So that you're seeing the book as good as we could get it.
Okay. Thanks again to everyone. We'll close things up now.
Thank
Nicole,
you all
is there
so
anything
much.
you want to add?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And I'm going to end the recording right now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Mary and Wendy, thank you
What
so
to think
much.
about.
And Mona, thank you for facilitating.
Yeah, thanks for
Very
joining us.
thoughtful. Thank you. It's
Take care.
wonderful to see you all.